okay? And by that, I will end, and I will hand it in to Robert to talk about the technology and the mindful use of technology and some tips on how to work from home in the healthiest way possible, okay? Thank you, Robert.
Thanks so much, Manal.
Thank you.
Thank you
for sharing
really for all that guidance on being healthy physically, mentally. And I will share my screen. So I'm just going to give a few pointers about how to be productive working remotely, online, and stay connected with others and deal with isolation that many of us may be experiencing now. The first thing I'll say, and this is a set of recommendations that apply even if you are working outside of the home, but particularly important when you're working from home, is to manage all of those interruptions that we get all the time from our devices, text message notifications, appointment reminders, all kinds of notifications that are popping up from our devices. There's a couple of things you can do to really radically reduce those, to help you stay focused and more productive on what you need to do. I always recommend making really significant use of do not disturb. On an iPhone or Apple device, you can just swipe up from the bottom of the screen, tap on the crescent moon icon to turn it on at any time. And what do not disturb does, and all the devices and operating systems have their own versions of this, is that it stops notifications from appearing and sounds of notifications from playing. It doesn't mean that you won't get the text message. It just means you won't get a notification of it. You can always go to that text message later, but the key is you won't be interrupted by the notification of it. And I know a lot of people are concerned about, what if I need to get an emergency call or text from a family member, child, boss, or someone else? You can set up exceptions in Do Not Disturb, like for your favorite people, you can list them, and then Do Not Disturb will let messages from those people come in. So you can get the best of both worlds, which is block out most of the notifications, but let through the ones that you want to let through, so you don't have to be anxious that you might be missing notifications that you need. There's a lot of other features. I won't go into detail, but I mentioned earlier, you can schedule it automatically to turn on and off. You can schedule to turn on for a certain period of time, like an hour, which is great. Let's say you want to sit down and eat a meal. You can turn it on just for an hour, and then it'll turn off and you'll start getting notifications again. You can have it turn on for the duration of an appointment in your calendar if you want to stay focused in a meeting. All kinds of ways you can use it to manage those external notifications. And the other thing you can do is, so many of our apps on our devices notify us about things and interrupt us and distract us and interrupt our train of thought for things that we don't even need to know about at all. So very often when you install an app, it'll be designed to notify you about things, an update in the app or something else. I suggest you go into the settings in your phone, go up to notifications, and then you can go through a list of all the apps on your device. Basically turn off notifications for everything unless you absolutely need it. And I think you'll find that if you adopt that mindset, that there's very few notifications you really actually need to get. Most of them you don't need. Even weather app, you can limit to notifying you about something like an earthquake. You don't need to know necessarily when it's raining outside for it to notify you. So, and every time you install a new app, I'd suggest go in and turn off the notifications. It'll really help you stay focused. The next thing is, I'd suggest, and you have to use some judgment here and strike a balance. But you can use, a lot of people when they first start working at home find that it's hard to maintain that new routine and balance between work and personal time at home. You can use some technology to remind you about that, to set off a bell or a timer or something when you're about to start work, at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day. There is a technique that's been around for a long time called the Pomodoro technique. People did it before apps. It just means it's a method of working where you work for a certain amount of time, let's say 50 minutes, and then take a break for a certain amount of time, like 10 minutes, work 50, break for 10. And that's a way of not overworking, rejuvenating yourself throughout the day. And you can use technology. There's Pomodoro apps, Pomodoro websites where you can tell it how much you want to work, how much you want to take a break. It can play sounds for you during your work time, let's say nature sounds or water sounds, then ring a bell when it's time to take a break, and then again when it's time to start working. So I would say, just like Manal said, flexibility here is key, and experimenting with what works right for you. Some people find too many of these reminders are themselves distracting, but I find for myself, I've set things up in a way where the reminders are helpful but not too distracting. Some people like tons of these reminders to start and stop. Other people just want something at the beginning and ending of the day, for example. But the key is experiment, pick what works right for you.
Robert, can you make the presentation full screen
Yes.
down? All right, okay, here we go.
Okay. So, and you can set reminders, as I said, to meditate or stretch or relax or eat or whatever you want. There's lots of apps and software out there for doing this. Now, I mentioned sound. You might not think of about sound, but I find that playing some kind of sound, like for me, water sounds are very calming and also help me to focus. Um, but other people find nature sounds or like classical music. Most people recommend against any kind of music that has a human voice in it, because it'll tend to distract you from work. Um, but I mentioned a few apps here. Focus at Will is one. Calm is an app and website. Insight Timer all have a wide variety of sounds. They can both calm you, help you stay focused, and block out sounds of other people or other things, at home. If there's many people at home, that can be helpful. Yeah.
I agree with that, Robert. And also, I found actually many of these on YouTube itself. I don't know if
Yes.
you've found, yeah, I found a variety of those even on YouTube. Um, but this is also good to know.
Yeah.
There are so
One
many.
of the things I like about the apps is that you can combine them with a timer. So if you want to, I have sometimes found if I want to accomplish a certain task in 30 minutes, I'll set the timer for 30 minutes. And then when it goes off, I know I've reached the time. Or if I know, oh, I need to take a phone call in 30 minutes and I don't want to miss it, and I don't want to keep looking at my calendar over and over again to see when that phone call is coming, I set the timer. Plays water sounds for 30 minutes, and then when it goes off, I know now it's time for my next appointment. So all kinds of ways you can use this. Okay, handling isolation is the main other issue that I've found people are dealing with in working from home now. It's always something to deal with when working from home, but even more so now when we're all practicing social distancing, and many of us are now actually under government orders to not leave the house unless necessary. So the main point I want to make about handling isolation, I'll give a few examples, but if you only remember one thing, is that there are many ways now with technology to try to recreate the kinds of personal interactions virtually that you would have had previously face-to-face at your workplace. So I'll give some examples. There's a funny example here, a tweet. Experts recommend sticking to your daily routine working from home, showing a couple of people acting as if they're on the subway train. But although it's funny, there's a truth to it. It's really helpful for us to keep a routine, whether you do it in this way or not. But there's a bunch of ways you can create some virtual experiences that are live with other people. And I give some examples here. Virtual water cooler. Send a work colleague a message. The subject lines, water cooler talk or something. It can be casual, something about your personal life, the kind of thing you would say to that person in the office or at the workplace around the water cooler or in the hallway. You have the challenge now is that we all are in a situation where we need to intentionally create these kinds of interactions that would have previously just happened naturally in the workplace. And I know it can feel a little awkward or unnatural to do something like that, to send a water cooler message to someone. But this is we're in an unnatural, unusual situation. And I'd encourage people to try to work through that feeling of awkwardness and then experience the positive feeling you have when you engage in that communication. Hopefully then it'll help you move through the awkwardness the next time when you get that, positive feedback from doing it. A whole bunch of other examples. You can have lunch at your computer on your own, but with a friend or colleague who's having lunch on the other side over Zoom, just like you would, face to face. People forever have engaged with each other over meals. It's something that's very connecting. No reason why you can't do it virtually.
Yeah.
If you're a supervisor, a manager of any kind, you can have virtual office hours. Tell your employees that you are going to be available Monday and Wednesday from 1 to 2, or whatever the time is. Have a Zoom meeting set up for that so people can come in and talk with you about whatever they would in office hours otherwise, or that they previously would knock on your door. Now is a time to do that through Zoom. And then it's a little bit more creative is the idea of a virtual commute, which is if you were previously driving to work with people, or if you knew the people on your train or your bus. Many people do. They're not people you work with, but you commute with them. If you have their contact information, schedule a Zoom with them once a day, where you're spending 5 or 10 minutes even chatting with them like you would on the commute. We are, like Manal said, really fortunate, many of us, to now have this technology during this time that people didn't have throughout really all of history. There's a lot of ways we can take advantage of it. And last point comes back to the flexibility, is that I put scheduled versus spontaneous versus open for any of these things. First of all, there's probably things that aren't on this list that you can think of for yourself that you can try, experiment with them. And you can either schedule them, like, okay, let's plan amongst a group of us who are work colleagues who used to be at the workplace together. Let's plan for 9 o'clock and noon and 3 o'clock to have 5 minutes of chat by Zoom. It could be spontaneous, where you just call someone or Skype someone or Zoom someone at any time you feel like it. Or open, what I mean by open is, and I know of companies that are doing this now, and just creating an open Zoom meeting that's running all day. And people at the company can come in and out of it at any time, just like they would bump into each other in the hallway or the cafeteria. That's open. And that's very low pressure. Anyone who wants to join at any time to take a break can do that and meet up with whoever else happens to be there. So these are a few different options, and I'm really just giving these to you to open your mind to possibilities, to try things out. And I know lots of people are already experimenting with all of this. The last thing I'll say is,
Robert,
yes, Manal,
speaking
yes.
of all of these opportunities, my co-working spaces, they've already started doing, they've already lined up virtual lunches and, on the calendar, on the Google Calendar. I reached out a couple of days ago. There is a colleague of mine who used to invite me on a cup of coffee. He's a coffee connoisseur, and he really likes good roasted coffee. So I told him, hey buddy, can we have a coffee break one of these days on Zoom? So a lot of people are thinking about that, and I think this is very healthy. So thank you for mentioning that.
You're welcome. Yeah, the last thing I'll say is, I'm personally starting to default to video. In other words, when I'm going to communicate with someone, I try to remind myself to do it by video if possible. Before this, I would only use video if necessary for some reason, or if I thought it was helpful. And otherwise, I'd use email or text or Slack or something. Why? It's more efficient. It takes less time. But right now we're all in a situation where the need to connect with each other personally is at least as important as saving time or being as efficient as possible. So I would suggest thinking about that. You know, you might not previously have thought of using Zoom or video conference for some pretty mundane work communication. But now think about it. Again, it may feel awkward, but try it out and see. Um, because you may find that once you move past the awkwardness, you really enjoy that connection, even if it's for 30 seconds or a minute. And even if it takes 5 minutes when an email would have taken 1 minute, and it's, quote, more inefficient in that regard, it may really help you stay personally connected and help the person on the other end as well. So I'd suggest not just trying this for you, but also to start spreading the idea of doing things differently to other people to help all of us. Okay, just a couple of traps for the unwary. I'll just mention one, which is, assume you're going to be on video calls when you don't expect it. Dress appropriately, not necessarily the way you would for the office, but you don't want to be like this guy where you have to scramble to put clothes on that are, presentable. I have a virtual background behind me. You can see my hand disappearing. Sometimes it's more obvious than others. You might try that on Zoom, virtual background, if you're, need to get quickly on a meeting and you haven't cleaned up your office. But the pitfall for that is, Zoom virtual backgrounds only work in Zoom. If someone wants to call you on Skype or Google Meet is another one, your virtual background won't work. So, be prepared to be on video so that if you have to, on the spur of the moment, you're not stressed out because you're not dressed appropriately or your room isn't appropriate or something like that. And go ahead.
I like actually the point you made about dressing, because one of the things that it could be much healthier for all of us to simulate, to feel like we are at work in just normal situations, is to dress for work. So you may not dress the same things, you were dressing for the job, but being in your work clothes helps a lot in prompting you and giving you a sense of structure and a normalcy for pursuing your job from home, even though it's from home. And as you said, it helps whenever someone asks you to be on the video or you want to communicate via video, you don't worry about the way you are looking.
Yeah, that's right. It gets you in that work mindset. The last thing I'll mention is for people who are managers or in any kind of supervisory position. I think it's important for you to set the tone in the organization that it's okay for people to spend some amount of their time engaging in these kind of casual, non-work communications over Zoom or over work communication systems like Slack, because people need to know that it's okay to do that it's acceptable, that it's actually encouraged, and that they won't be penalized for doing that in the workplace because of the different situation we're in. Of course, every company is going to need to create their own guidelines. It does need to be clear that people should be spending most of their time engaged in work and not, spending hours in personal communication. So there needs to be some clear communication, but what certainly needs to be clear now is that it's okay and encouraged to spend some amount of time doing what previously would have been discouraged to do over a work video conferencing system, which is just chat with people or have coffee. So I think that's something from the manager level up that's going to need to be given a lot of new thought now, to be supportive of people now that our work and personal lives are blending together because of social distancing and working from home in a way that they didn't in the past. And that's to help keep employees and workers healthy, happy, safe in many ways, not just by enabling us to keep our relationships going, but even to do something as practical as, not leave people feeling the need to get out of the house and meet with people in person because they're so lacking in it at home. I think for companies, if they give people outlets to connect virtually, we'll all be more likely to stay physically safe through practicing the social distancing that we need to. So thanks, Manal. That's all I have for now, but I hope that that's helpful.
Oh, that was extremely helpful. Thank you so much, Robert. That was awesome. Thanks for sharing your experience. I know that you have worked from home for over 16 years, I think you said.
Yes, 16 out of 20. It was a little bit here and there, but yes, and for over 10 years straight now.
And you have developed technologies and apps before, and that got you into the thinking of how to handle all of this. Think about the isolation and thinking about connecting and thinking about all of these details. I know, it's good that you have your contact on the slide. If anyone wants to check Robert has courses also.
Yes.
He has a lively podcast on technology for mindfulness. You can check it out on his website, technologyformindfulness.com. Thank you again, Robert, for sharing this webinar with me. Thank you for sharing your experience. It was wonderful and fun time.
Thanks so much for having me on here. I learned a lot from your presentation, and I'm sure everyone else will as well. So thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Robert.